All right, everybody, we're back. Brand new Take Aim. As always, happy to get a new show out and always happy to talk with my good buddy Mike Stephan from Kansas. And Mike just put down an absolute hammer of a buck late season with bow in Kansas and shares with us just some of the details from getting a new piece of ground to how we use trail cameras to help figure out this property and actually end up killing this buck. So hope you guys enjoy the show. It's a good one. Mike shares a lot of detail of just how he did it and kind of all started with permission just to shed hunt, not even hunting yet. So it's a great story. Hope you guys enjoy. We'll see you guys next week. All right, guys, we are back. Brand new Take Aim podcast. And as always, excited to have this guy on, Mike Stephan. What's happening, Mike?
Oh, not much, man. Just trying to stay warm in this December weather we've got going on in Kansas. It's a little, I'd say it's below average temperatures here this year.
Man, it seems like that everywhere. We've had like what I called my February weather for Michigan. We're having it in November, and it's carried over into December. It's been like, you know what I mean, 20 degrees days. It's been cold.
Oh yeah. It's been, we've had mornings in the teens, and then highs in the mid to low 30s throughout part of November and into December now, and it's I can definitely tell you it's affected the deer movement in a positive way.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's real good. I mean, it's been real steady here, so at this time of year it seems to be a little bit harder to see those weather patterns because it's been just cold. It's been, like I said, a lot of 20-degree days, and there isn't a lot of, like, we're not getting that daytime warm-up. You know what I mean? It just is staying within 1 or 2 degrees every day. So,
yeah.
But like you said, it does make deer get up and move. It just still is the right day, and you got to pick those, if you could find a high pressure day or whatever. But it's still hard to do when you're not seeing those big fronts come and go, so to speak.
Yeah.
But with that said, man, I'm always excited to see guys put down big deer in December because it's so hard to do. And I know you just had success on an awesome buck, and just want to say congrats to that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was that was a really cool deer, and I'm very happy with how it all went down.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one thing we always do on the podcast is, try to do recent stories of success and really good takeaways. And I know that you kind of have a lot, to talk about with this deer just because, you basically came onto a new piece of property just this year, right?
Yeah. So I got, I originally got permission to shed hunt it in the spring, and that's the only permission that I had was to shed hunt it. And then, as the summer progressed, I kept in contact with the landowner, and eventually I just outright asked. I said, would it be all right if I did some bow hunting on it this year? And the landowner was like, yeah, sure, why not? There's plenty of deer around, and it's no big deal. She had mentioned that there were potentially some other guys that might rifle hunt it, but she hadn't heard from them in a couple of years, so I wasn't sure what I was getting into, but I figured why not just go all in and see what I could come up with. And it's quite a little honey hole, so to speak, as far as the amount of deer, the quality of deer, and how the property sets up.
Yeah. So if you could, like, paint like a little bit of the picture of just what the property is and kind of how you went about, attacking it and scouting it, and did you walk it and shed hunt it early in the year, and did any of what you learned kind of come into play?
So When I walked it in the spring for sheds, my mind was so focused on finding antlers that I didn't bank those places in my mind where I thought, potential stand locations were at or good travel routes. I was just so focused on the sheds themselves, and I didn't have hunting permission yet.
Right.
I didn't even think to really, look at all those other aspects of the property. So I kind of did myself a disservice when I did that, because once I got permission, it was, in the summer and everything was green and jungle. So it was a lot harder to figure out the property that time of year versus if I had done some of that work in the springtime when there still wasn't any foliage on.
Right. Yeah, that does kind of change things, so to speak. I mean, I walk a piece of ground back home, actually, so nowhere near where I hunt, just it's actually a park, and there's some farmland that I have permission to hunt, and you have to have a park pass to go in there, but there's tons of deer that live in there. So I always walk the farm in that park, but so to speak, I'm not doing it like you just said. I wouldn't do it in any manner to be like, well, you know what, this is where I need to be. I kind of like, oh man, this is where the deer live, but I'm not looking for that tree or those pinch points or anything like that, so it does kind of come into play when you don't have that go-ahead permission yet.
Yep. It definitely set me back in the amount of work I had to do once I did get permission to bow hunt it. I'm also in northeast Kansas, so I'm going to kind of lay the land out for you. Northeast Kansas is a lot different than the rest of the state. A lot of guys are hunting western Kansas, central Kansas. Seems to be a lot more guys hunting in that southeast area too. Where I'm at in northeast Kansas, it is a lot like a northern Missouri or southern Iowa type landscape. There's lots of ag, and it's not flat. There are places that are flat, but the places that I'm in tend to be fairly hilly, kind of some of that hill country with some of those big mature timber stands, oaks and walnuts and hickories and all that. But then you also get grown up pasture land that grows up into cedar thickets and hedge timber, and we've got some hedgerows and stuff, such things like that around too. So it's not what your typical Kansas guy runs into if you're talking about the rest of the state, and especially when you see Kansas hunts on TV, it tends to be big CRP fields and small little stands of timber and stuff, but that's not what I'm in where I'm at. So the property that I got permission on has a lot of hills and valleys and big deep cuts, and it's a lot harder to hunt than most would think because of the wind situation. When you're in that hill country, the wind is very inconsistent. No matter which direction it's supposed to be coming out of, when you're sitting in the stand, it always ends up being a little bit different, or you get some swirling winds. It's kind of frustrating, to say the least.
Yeah, it's a lot. The area you're in is what I would call very diverse, and you think it would almost be a little bit easier, but it's so diverse with what you said earlier, Mike, with the standing crops, most of the season. You got a lot of natural grasses or set aside CRP in the timber. So with all that, you just have expanded your cover by so much, meaning the deer can be almost anywhere. And then you have to do a lot of the, like you said, just wind control, and that's really hard to do out there. The wind is really shifty out there.
It is. it's hard to get a wind to stay one direction through an entire, 4 or 5 hour sit in a tree. I typically, multiple times in a sit, I'll get a swirl. It'll hit the back of my neck versus the front of my face. And it usually doesn't stay the wrong direction for very long, but when you're in that moment when the deer is coming in and that happens, the wind does a swirl or a switch, it can be devastating.
Yeah, it can end a hunt really quick, obviously, and out there it really seems that you may get away with a little bit more, a slight noise or some movement, but man, you don't get away out there at all with any shift of the wind, and it hits their nose. It's pretty much end of your hunt for at least that deer.
Yep. It's the only time it doesn't affect them as much is obviously that November chase phase when their mind is on other things and they tend to let their senses kind of go by the wayside for a while.
Yeah. So with that said, how did you kind of choose to pick out your stand locations for your hit list bucks?
So there were the first thing I did is once I got permission to hunt the property is I went on and started looking at the aerials, but I also laid in the topos because of the hill country, you can get a better sense of how the land lays and how deer would naturally want to move about on the property without, getting ground, feet on the ground and going in there and just busting it all up. I kind of wanted to leave it alone for the most part, but still get boots on the ground and confirm what I was seeing on the topo when I put stands up. But the first location that I wanted to get set up in happens to be the best location I think on the farm thus far that I found. So that topo map really helped me make a decision on how I wanted to hunt the place. The area that I was looking at wanting to put a stand and ended up putting a stand in it's kind of a saddle, which is it's a low spot between two high spots, but then there's actually a couple of ditches that run up towards that low spot that gives a very natural kind of crisscross or wagon wheel shape of trails that run through, and I was kind of trying to hunt that saddle where these deer were crossing over from ditch to ditch or just making movements right around that area.
Right. So the topo, Mike, like how much of that affected kind of your thoughts and just overall, like were you sitting high or low or is that exactly what you were using it for?
Yeah, I wanted to look at, how much elevation change there was, and because, essentially what happens is if you're in the saddle and you are sitting too low, close to one of those ditches, and you're not very high up in a tree, you're going to be eye level with deer that are coming over that saddle and making movements across that saddle. But also the disadvantage to sitting too low is the wind tends to be more swirly the lower you get towards those ditches. So I wanted to stay a little higher on the saddle, but be in a position where I had the height advantage, but then also get the most consistent wind direction too.
Right. Okay. I gotcha. So with that said, like a lot of your stand placements were how high would you say, like 20 feet, 25 feet, or where at in that range?
Anywhere from 18 to 20 to all the way up to about 30. I got one setup that I put in, and the tree is a little bit lower down from the saddle than I wanted it to be, so I put the stand higher to try and compensate for that, and it's about 30 feet up. And that was the stand that I had the majority of my encounters with these deer in, and then once I sat that stand several times on a couple different winds, if I had a straight north wind, it was usually pretty good. It was fairly consistent. But if I had any kind of a northwest wind, what would happen is I actually, to kind of lay it out, I'm sitting in the tree and I'm facing the saddle, and directly behind me is a big ditch that drops off into a bottom. And if I had and I'm facing east, so the ditch is behind me to the west, and my left side is the north direction. If I had a northwest wind, what was happening is the wind would actually swirl down into that ditch and then shoot up the ditch at me from my back and go almost straight west, which is the exact wrong direction that I wanted the wind to be in, because that's where most of the deer were kind of through. And so I sat that, when I had a good wind, but then I actually ended up killing this deer that I killed in a different stand maybe about 100 yards further south, because I needed a spot that I could hunt with a couple of different winds instead of only being able to hunt it with a straight north wind.
Yeah, for sure. And that makes a lot of sense, because obviously we don't get those winds every day, and it limits your free time to go hunt, hugely, especially when you probably have a deer or two picked out you're really trying to get on.
Yeah, I mean, I had several encounters throughout, a couple encounters throughout November, and I've sat in that area, a handful of times and watched a lot of the deer activity, and I got a real good sense of, how the deer were making their way across the saddle and coming into it, and I had a couple trail cameras set up, so I was watching their movements. And in Kansas, you can bait, so I had some corn out there to just get deer to come in and stop and get good pictures of them, so I could see what was in the area. And those sits that I made in the stand that was about 30 feet up, they were really good observational sits for me to make the move that I did to end up killing the deer that I did this year.
That's cool. So running the camera, Mike, did you kind of get enough intel from like your number one or two deer that you're like, all right, now I kind of see a pattern, and that's a deer I think I could kill, or this is where I think they're going from? It sounds like you already adjusted your stand setup, but was there something else that gave you the idea that like now you're in the ball game for that deer?
So my number one deer was a deer that he was a big non-typical, and I had my heart pretty set on that deer, just because he was so cool, and you don't get to hunt deer like that very often.
And plus Kansas is one buck state, so obviously you're going to set yourself up for as much success as you can with one tag.
Yeah, exactly. And from the pictures that I was getting a general sense of the directions that these deer were coming in and to the saddle and then leaving the saddle. And so a tactic that I actually did this year that I think helped me really narrow down direction of travel and time of day of travel was I had my main, camera set up on the bait pile just to get the deer to come in and get some good pictures of them. But then I had a couple different cameras set up kind of in a, on a trail a little bit of a distance away from the bait pile.
Okay.
And what I was doing was trying to figure out which trails and when these deer were coming in and going through the hill. And, that honestly was one of the best things that I did. Instead of having a few trail cameras spread out all across the property, I had a central area that I had been getting the deer that I wanted to kill on. So I micromanaged that spot, basically, and set up cameras around to find out, how he was traveling, when he was traveling, and where he was traveling.
Okay.
And
that's really cool. Good idea. Mike, how far away were those from the main camera that you were, hoping to get photos on, so to speak?
Anywhere from 30, 40, 50 yards up to maybe 100 yards or so away from that spot. So they were pretty tight together as far as what you would consider wanting to try and spread your cameras out across the property to get more intel.
Right.
I didn't really care about what was going on around the other parts of the property. I wanted to know what was going on right there.
Okay. So with that said, what did you end up learning from those cameras?
I mean, basically I learned how the deer were, where the deer were coming in and what time to that saddle, and then where they were leaving to and what time they were leaving. So I was, what I did with these trail cam pictures is I actually would download them, and put them onto my computer, and then I would line them up as, and have them organized as date and time. So I could go through and actually watch a deer walk past one camera, come up to the next camera, on the bait pile or whatever, and eat a little bit of corn, and then walk out of there and then go past my other camera that was on the other side, as they were traveling through that saddle. And so I was getting how long they were spending there, how long it took them to get from one camera to the other, just getting a good feel for their direction of travel and their time of day and how they went about going from one spot on the farm to the other, which is kind of like if you were sitting in a stand watching it happen, but I didn't have to be in the woods. I had the camera set up. Right.
Yeah. Low pressure that way, obviously. But was there, I guess, like you just said, it's kind of the same thing as being in the stand, but was there anything on those cameras that kind of surprised you? Like, some deer moved really fast, some moved really slow?
Yeah, I mean, you could tell that some deer, like usually the does move a lot faster through the woods than the bucks do. The bucks,
sure.
Especially the bucks, those older bucks, they really just take their time and wander through, just using their eyes and ears and nose to really figure out what's going on. And another thing that I noticed, and I noticed this in when I was sitting in the stand, is as some of these bigger deer were coming into these areas, and this is during November, so it's when some of that rut action's going on. They were using their nose to scent check some of these spots like the bait pile and whatnot, and they would actually just kind of walk around downwind of the spot before they ever decided to come in and, actually make their move through the saddle or, make their move past the bait pile.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, very typical big buck behavior, so to speak. You know what I mean? Just like you said, slow and as always, they're super, super patient and way more patient than we are. That's why they survive, so to speak. We kind of get to your deer, Mike. Did you end up kind of getting some of that with the deer you ended up killing on your cameras? What he was doing and what he was up to?
Yeah, I mean, so funny story with this deer. He's the first buck that I had on camera when I first put cameras up that I was like,
oh, very cool.
He was a big 8-pointer, and I was pretty interested in him, but I didn't want to punch my tag right away just because I didn't know what else was on the property.
Right.
And so I wanted to give it some time and see what showed up. And so this deer that I ended up shooting, he was a very regular, during daylight hours, evenings, especially evenings, he'd come in and be on his way through the timber to try and get to the ag fields. Probably by the time it was dark, he was hitting the ag fields. And from July to it seemed to be late October, he kind of became a little less frequent, and that's when some of these other deer showed up. Which, I mean, they say that these bucks, they have their summer range and then their winter range, and they'll move around, especially during the rut, trying to find all the does that are receptive. And I think he was just one of those deer that he was a real traveler. He didn't.
Oh, okay.
He liked to move around a lot, and I actually got pictures of him mid-November, 2 miles away on a different property that I have permission on.
Jeez.
So he was definitely making his rounds.
Heck yeah, he was.
Yeah, then towards the end of November and beginning of December, he started showing back up a little more frequently. By this time I had changed, I had set up a new stand on the further to the south of where my stand was, the one that was 30 feet up in the tree, and I needed a stand that I could hunt with multiple wind directions and not be too worried about it. So I made a move, and the night that I made that move, I had an encounter with a really big one, but he was too smart. He circled downwind and caught my wind and left, and then actually ended up having about, I think it was a 25 or 30 deer night, and the buck I ended up killing was one of the deer that came in, and it was really hard to pass that deer when I watched him walk in.
I can see why. He looks like he's 3 feet tall off his head, so it would be hard to pass for anybody.
Yeah, he was definitely, when I saw him, it was pretty awesome. He's a big deer. He's a very big deer, and I was just so focused on wanting to get that other one that I made the decision to give him a pass. And I don't regret doing that. That means I get to spend some more time in the tree. But with my busy filming schedule and it starting to get to the latter part of the season here in Kansas, I actually made another move to a different tree, just based on the movements I was seeing of these deer, they were kind of shifting their typical trail patterns, and they were circling downwind to me a lot easier. So I made another move, and that's the stand that I ended up killing this deer out of.
That's a cool takeaway in itself, Mike, because it sounds like, I mean, we know they're really good at what they do, and it doesn't take much to educate them. And it sounds like, you know, guys talk about this all the time when they their first time in, or why guys like a climbing tree stand, because it's always a new spot. You know what I mean? So you ended up moving again on this deer and ended up getting an opportunity, but because it was almost like it was new again, you switched up the game on them, so to speak.
Yep. These deer, they were getting smart. You know, they had smelled me enough times, and I was using all the scent control I could. You know, I was ozoning my clothes and spraying down and taking showers and everything else, and it minimized the effect. I could tell, especially the does, they would come in, and if they were downwind, some of them, you know, they'd stick their nose up and they'd smell something, but they wouldn't blow out.
Right.
Which is huge. You know, that's what you want. Even if they smell you, as long as they're not making a ruckus about it, if they just smell remnants of you and they don't see you, they won't blow out of there and ruin your hunt. So, but I could tell they were starting to catch on to what it was that was going on. And so I needed to make that move again to try and get the wind even more in my favor, because it's really hard to kill a big mature deer without the wind in your favor.
Yeah, it is. It's almost impossible. Like you said, it's almost a victory when they, you know, get your wind and they can't quite figure it out, and you've done enough scent control to get away with that hunt. But usually you don't end up killing a upland 4 or 5 year old deer with even that much.
Right. Yep.
So you ended up moving, and when did you end up getting to see that deer you ended up killing again?
So let's see here. I killed him on the 6th of December. Or no, it was the 7th.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was the 7th, but yeah. Either way. So just a few days ago, everybody.
Yeah. I had got back from a hunt that I was filming out in western Kansas for the Kansas rifle opener. And the rifle season opened on the 28th of November. And it goes for about 12 days, 13 days. And so I was right. I got back from that trip. I was right in the middle of the rifle season, and I knew that my plan was to go in there and try and bow hunt during the rifle season. Just because number one, I had permission to bow hunt the property. I didn't have permission to rifle hunt it, but I also wanted to get it done with my bow, and I knew I could because of how, the timber laid out where I wasn't going to be able to shoot much over 40 yards anyway. So it just made sense to take the bow in. And
some properties lay out that way too, Mike, where it just seems like, you can go sit in any tree somewhere and probably get a shot with a bow. There's just some places like that where it just is, a better bow property. And like you said, if you're in the timber anyways, what do you need a rifle for if you can only shoot 40 yards anyways?
And that's as soon as the day after I got back from western Kansas, I went in and made that and moved my stand that day. Funny thing is I I put my stand up in this tree that I thought was a good tree, and I got up in it, and I took the whole time to put the stand up and everything, got in the stand, and looked around, and I said, I don't have any bow shots. Like, I can shoot to like 10 yards in any direction. I don't have any, 20 or 30 yard shots anywhere. It was just so thick. So I actually pulled the stand back down, reworked what was going on, looked at different trees, and finally found another tree that was probably only 40 yards away from the one I had just set up, and it was a much better situation. I got up in that tree, had a lot more open area to make bow shots, and I said, this is the spot. This is the spot that it's going to be. And to try and get you to picture why I picked that spot, I was about 100 yards south of my original bait pile and the saddle that I had been hunting. And when I was sitting in my stand up there, I was always watching deer move across further to the south of me. I could see them going through the woods, and I could see deer going back and forth down that direction. So my idea was, if I get down on that trail of those deer moving through there, then if I have some kind of a north wind, I'm less likely to spook those deer that are moving back and forth. And I was also watching some of the bucks come in and out from that direction as well. So I got set up in that tree, and again, I'm facing north, and to my right, which would be east, there's actually kind of a little bit of a lane that comes in from kind of a bedding area, and it's kind of a top, it's like a more elevated spot where there's like a ditch to my northeast, and then there's a ditch to my southeast, and then there's kind of a raised spot where these deer were kind of using that top to travel in and then kind of make a turn towards the north and, go more north. And the way my stand was set up, I had that lane to my right, and my hopes were that these deer would come down that lane and make that turn like I'd watched them do before, and then kind of walk out in front of me. And the spot that I had picked out to shoot was only about 17 yards. And I actually, after I got that tree stand set up, I didn't go back in there for several days because I didn't have good winds. I had a lot of south wind days and west wind days, which was just the absolute wrong directions for that spot. So I ended up leaving that alone for probably 3 or 4 days.
Just waiting on a north wind again?
Yeah, I needed some kind of a north wind. And so I got a north wind finally and went in there. I got set up in the tree about 2:30 in the afternoon. And it felt good. It felt right. I checked the trail camera, and I actually had plenty of deer movement going through. And that morning, December 7th, I had pictures of that big 8 that I ended up killing on the camera.
Oh, did you really?
When I saw those pictures and realized he was there and he was moving in daylight still, I told myself, if that deer shows up, I'm not going to pass him again. And so I got set up in the stand at 2:30. Didn't see anything for the next hour, and then 3:30 rolls around, and I kind of look to my right and hear this little yearling doe comes trotting in right down that lane that I was hoping that those deer would come in on. And she came right down that lane, turned and walked right up the trail that I was hoping that they would walk up. And she went out in front of me, and then looked like her mom showed up right behind her down that lane, and then turned and walked up, and they moved in there pretty quick. They almost were kind of running a little bit. And so once I realized that it seemed like they were being pushed or bumped a little bit, the first thing I did was ease up, because I was sitting. So I eased up, stood up, got my bow off the hanger, and just had it at the ready. Because those does got out in front of me, and they kept looking back in the direction that they had come from and just staring. And as everybody knows, when deer do that, there's something else back there.
Yeah, usually that's a moment where you start to get excited.
Yes, very much so. So I had no idea what to expect, but then he was just walking down that trail right to me. I saw his antlers, I saw, the tall tines, and I said, that's him. If he makes it in front of me, he's going to get an arrow. And he's coming right at me down that lane, and he's directly east of me. And he gets to a spot where he can he would turn and follow the trail that those does had walked up, or I don't know what other direction he might want to go. Well, he stood there for a while, looking around, doing as big bucks do, just making sure that he was safe and that nobody else was around. And he finally turned and walked up that trail, exactly where those does were. He started walking up that trail, and he got to an opening that I was gonna try and draw back on him, and I think I may have just shifted my bow position a little bit, and he must have caught the movement just a little bit, and he looked up at me, and I'm probably 18 to 20 feet in the air, and the good thing is the sun was literally directly behind my back.
That's a big help.
It was blazing right down on my back and right into his eyes, and so all he would have been able to see is shadows. And I just didn't move. I just didn't move when he flipped his head and looked up at me. And he didn't look at me for very long, and he turned his head and started walking down the trail again. And as soon as his head went behind a big tree, I drew back, and it must have been right as I got to my anchor, he had got past that tree and saw the movement, or maybe even heard me get to full draw. And he stopped, and luckily he stopped right where I had an opening to shoot, and put my top pin right on his vitals and shot. And I knew it felt good. I knew it was a good shot when I shot, but as soon as the arrow hit him, he dropped to the ground, and I knew right then that I'd hit him in the spine. And I think because he was on enough of an alert, even at 17 yards, I think he ducked my arrow, and luckily he didn't go far, and I got him in the spine. So I had to rush down out of the tree and put a arrow in him, but it was pretty surreal to make that move with my stand, and then wait for the right wind, and then have that deer walk in exactly how I wanted him to.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Yeah, it's like he read the script, and it was.
Yeah, for sure.
It was really cool.
Yeah, really cool, and a well-executed game plan, so to speak. It's hard to have that patience we talked about earlier and that restraint. And, you did that and waited for the right wind to get that opportunity. And we hear it all the time. It's just hard to believe those, if you have a big deer or two and you have some history like Mike did, those deer are there. They're not going anywhere. You just have to not make a mistake until it's your time to go in there and get the job done. And, man, that's exactly what you did, Mike.
Yeah. that was one thing that I wanted to try and focus on for sure this year, since it was a new property that I didn't know that well, was to just utilize not doing it and something just to wait it out.
Mike, could you repeat that, because you kind of broke up? We lost the audio for a second.
Yeah, I mean, basically, that was one thing that I really wanted to do with this property this year, being that it was a new property to me, and I didn't want to screw it up for the future hunts either. I wanted to, be as patient as I could and not go in there and blow things out on a bad wind or something like that. I just wanted to wait for the right conditions.
Yeah, I bet you did, man. It's an awesome deer, and it's a super cool story, and it's always, I think, the most exciting time, is when you get to learn a piece of property and you've had it a long time and you're like, man, I got it figured out. But the other part is when you get a brand new piece and you're just slowly putting together all those puzzle pieces and niching that puzzle away till it's complete. And I'm excited to see what you do with that property in the future as well.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm going to try and keep the landowner happy and do what I can to help them out on whatever they need help with. And I hope I have a lot of years to come on this property, because it'll be a cool ride if I do.
Yeah, for sure. I hope you do too. But I'll definitely have the picture of you as the media art with that deer that you killed, because it's a beautiful picture nonetheless, but awesome deer, and obviously it helps put the story together. But excited to talk some more about it. I know you got some things you're going to do later today with the property, so I hope to get a text or picture later.
Yeah, definitely.
So, but I don't know what else you got going on, Mike. Is there anything else you want to share as far as you personally, what you're doing right now at the moment?
I don't have a lot going on right now.
Home for the holidays.
Yeah, home for the holidays, that's right. The filming season has been touch and go. My November was busy as normal, but the industry, as we've talked about before, is in a little bit of an interesting place right now. So
for sure it is.
Seems to be harder and harder to come by.
Yeah, it is, sadly. Yeah. So I don't know if it's going to change, but it just stinks. But anyways, but nonetheless, you got a new piece of property to enjoy, and like I said, I'm excited to see what happens with it, and hopefully we can do this again. I know me and Mike had talked about, which we'll just kind of air out right now, the podcast. My goal is definitely by sometime to start a new year, but we're going to start doing some top-notch, camera quality kind of, podcast tips, for the professionals for, shooting cameras, video, and all that. And Mike's one of the best in the industry, so excited to kind of, bust out a series with him on that type of stuff.
Yeah, I can't wait. I love talking tech and gear and talking about filming your hunts and stuff like that, and hopefully we can get some good information out there to people that need it. Yeah,
for sure. And there's always, such good small tips that we'll get into later, and just gear-wise and how to even get settled up in the tree and all that stuff. And like I said, there's probably no better guy around than Mike to do that. So excited to get that out. And Mike, good luck on the property, and hopefully we'll chat here soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brandon.
All right. Thank you, man.